Silence, often mistaken for passivity, holds a profound and unsettling power, especially in the dynamics between men and women. From a Jungian perspective, a woman's silence is not emptiness but a rich field of unspoken emotion, intuition, and inner truth. For many men, this silence can provoke confusion, anxiety, or even a deep unconscious fear. Why? Because silence disrupts the rational, action-oriented nature of the masculine psyche, which Jung called the animus. A woman's silence isn't merely a lack of words. It is a symbolic descent into the archetypal feminine, what Jung referred to as the anima, the mysterious, emotional, and often irrational dimension of the soul that every man carries within. When a woman withdraws into silence, she invokes the unknown, stirring the man's own unconscious where the feminine resides. Her silence mirrors back to him what he may not understand about himself. It challenges control, exposes vulnerability, and calls for introspection. In Jungian terms, her quietness can catalyze individuation, the process of becoming whole, by forcing him to confront not her, but his own projections, assumptions, and shadow aspects. In this stillness, the real conversation begins, not with her words, but with his soul. A woman's silence, through the lens of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, is far more than the absence of words. It is a symbolic gesture that often evokes powerful unconscious responses in a man, responses that are deeply connected to the archetype of the anima. The anima, according to Jung, represents the feminine dimension of a man's psyche. She is the inner woman, the emotional and intuitive force that complements his conscious, rational mind. When a woman becomes silent, intentionally or otherwise, it can act as a psychological mirror, reflecting not just her own inner world, but also stirring the depths of the man's unconscious where the anima resides. To a man who is not in touch with his anima, a woman's silence can feel like a void, confusing, frustrating, or even threatening. He may find himself desperately trying to interpret it. Is she angry, hurt, distant, disinterested? These questions often reveal more about the man's inner state than the woman's. Her silence, in this case, is not necessarily about him at all, but his emotional reaction to it is. The discomfort he feels is a projection of his own unintegrated anima, now awakened by the stillness before him. The anima is not a single, static entity. She evolves through 4 primary stages, according to Jung: Eve, biological and instinctual; Helen, romantic and aesthetic; Mary, moral and nurturing; and Sophia, wise and spiritual. A man's relationship with each of these stages shapes how he experiences women and the feminine in general. When a woman goes silent, the particular way he reacts may depend on which anima stage he unconsciously projects onto her. If he's projecting the nurturing Mary, her silence may feel like emotional abandonment. If it's the romantic Helen, he may fear rejection. These responses are not really about her. They are reflections of his psychological development. What makes silence such a powerful mirror is that it demands a reaction without giving anything away. There are no cues to follow, no verbal assurances, no emotional signposts. A man is left to sit with the unknown, and in that void, his unconscious begins to speak. It is in this space that the anima becomes most active, bringing to the surface fears, longings, insecurities, and sometimes profound insights. For the man willing to listen to what his reaction is telling him, the woman's silence becomes a gateway to inner growth. This process can be deeply unsettling. Jung believed that encountering the anima can be as disorienting as it is enlightening. She can be a seductress, a muse, a guide, or a tormentor. The man who fails to recognize her influence may try to control or fix the silence, missing the opportunity it offers for self-reflection. But the man who dares to sit with the discomfort and trace it inward may discover that the woman's silence was not a wall, but a window, opening onto a previously hidden dimension of himself. In essence, a woman's silence challenges the man to abandon the urge to decode her like a puzzle and instead observe what is happening within his own psyche. Her silence becomes a psychological mirror in which he can meet his anima, often for the first time. This encounter, though subtle, can be profoundly transformative. It asks him to move beyond projection, to become aware of his own emotional currents, and to begin integrating the feminine within. In doing so, the man not only grows closer to understanding women, but, more importantly, he grows closer to understanding himself. When a woman chooses silence, whether intentional or instinctive, it can act as a powerful disruptor to the masculine rational ego. In Jungian terms, the ego represents the conscious self, shaped by logic, structure, and outward control. For many men, especially those heavily identified with traditionally masculine traits, the ego becomes anchored in reason, clarity, and action. Communication, in this framework, is direct and purposeful. Silence, however, offers none of these assurances. It defies logic. It resists interpretation, and in doing so, it disturbs the masculine psyche at its core. This disruption begins with uncertainty. A silent woman presents no verbal cues, no explanations, no dialogue to engage with. The rational mind searches for patterns, for meaning, for resolution, but finds none. The man may feel thrown off balance, unsure how to proceed. In that moment, his ego is destabilized. The silence doesn't fit into his familiar system of understanding, and because it cannot be solved, it confronts him with the uncomfortable truth that not everything can be reasoned through. For the masculine ego, which often finds identity in doing, fixing, and asserting control, this can be deeply unsettling. Silence denies all three. It is passive, ambiguous, and uncontrollable. The man may experience a rush of emotion, confusion, irritation, or anxiety. These reactions are symptoms of the ego's disturbance. He is no longer in command of the interaction. He cannot steer the direction of the exchange. Silence introduces an element of chaos into a world that the ego seeks to keep ordered. But this disruption is not inherently negative. In Jungian psychology, moments when the ego is challenged are also moments when the unconscious has a chance to speak. When the masculine rational ego is confronted with something it cannot grasp, such as a woman's silence, it opens a gateway to deeper psychological layers. The conscious mind may falter, but the unconscious begins to stir. The man may begin to reflect, question, or feel in ways he is not accustomed to. In that silence, he may become aware of his vulnerability, his insecurities, or his unmet emotional needs. This confrontation can serve as a turning point. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming a whole and integrated person, requires the ego to be confronted, even humbled. Without such disruption, the ego remains rigid, defending its boundaries and clinging to familiar narratives. A woman's silence can act as a gentle yet powerful force that invites the man to step outside his habitual ways of thinking and engage with the unknown. It's important to understand that the masculine ego is not inherently flawed. It plays a crucial role in building identity and navigating the external world. But when overly dominant, it can suppress the softer, more intuitive, emotional aspects of the psyche. A woman's silence, by offering no direct engagement, pulls the man inward, toward introspection rather than reaction. This inward movement is precisely what Jung encouraged: a dialogue with the unconscious, a recognition of one's inner landscape. Rather than being a threat, silence can become a form of initiation. It exposes the limitations of reason and invites the integration of other faculties: intuition, empathy, patience, and emotional presence. For the man willing to stay with the discomfort, to resist the urge to analyze or demand answers, the silence becomes a teacher. It leads him away from dominance and certainty toward humility and psychological depth. In this way, the disruption of the masculine rational ego is not a breakdown but a breakthrough. A woman's silence becomes not an obstacle, but an invitation to listen differently, to feel more deeply, and to grow into a fuller, more balanced version of the self. When a woman falls silent in a relationship or interaction, it often prompts an intense internal reaction in the man observing her quietness. From a Jungian perspective, this reaction is rarely about the silence itself, but rather about what the man unconsciously projects onto it. Projection is a key concept in Carl Jung's analytical psychology. It refers to the act of attributing one's own unconscious thoughts, feelings, or desires onto another person. In the context of a woman's silence, projection can lead a man to interpret her stillness not as a neutral or personal choice, but as something charged with meaning, often based on his own unresolved psychological material. For instance, A man who struggles with abandonment fears may interpret her silence as rejection. Another man, who feels unworthy or insecure, may hear blame or disapproval in the quiet. If a man feels the need to constantly perform or prove his value, he might assume her silence reflects disappointment. In all of these cases, the woman may not be communicating anything specific at all. Her silence may be thoughtful, peaceful, or simply her way of processing. Yet the man reacts as if it carries judgment or threat. This dynamic reveals the unconscious at work. The man is not seeing the woman clearly. He is seeing his own fears, wounds, or unmet needs projected onto her. This projection is further intensified when the woman represents an anima figure in the man's psyche. The anima, Jung's term for the unconscious feminine within a man, often carries immense emotional and symbolic weight. She is not just an individual woman but a vessel for his deepest feelings about love, beauty, nurturing, mystery, and emotional connection. When a woman embodies the anima archetype for a man, especially unconsciously, her silence becomes more than silence. It becomes loaded with meaning, often unrealistic or exaggerated. She becomes a screen onto which he casts his inner stories. This is where misinterpretation occurs. The man assumes the woman is communicating something specific through her silence. Anger, sadness, manipulation, contempt, when in reality, she may not be directing any emotional energy toward him at all. He believes he is reacting to her, but in truth, he is reacting to the contents of his own unconscious. This confusion leads to emotional tension, conflict, or even withdrawal, as the man struggles to make sense of something that exists more in his psyche than in reality. Misinterpretation rooted in projection is not necessarily conscious. In fact, the hallmark of projection is that it operates below awareness. The man genuinely believes he is interpreting external cues, unaware that he is seeing through the filter of his own history and inner narrative. He might recall past experiences where silence meant danger or punishment, or replicate dynamics from early childhood where emotional unavailability was painful. Without conscious reflection, these emotional patterns replay automatically in adult relationships. The path out of this confusion lies in self-awareness. Jung emphasized the importance of recognizing projection and withdrawing it. When a man learns to pause and question his assumptions, asking himself whether his interpretation is grounded in reality or colored by past experience, he begins to reclaim those unconscious parts of himself. Her silence becomes less of a mystery or threat and more of an opportunity. A chance to listen inwardly, to observe his emotional reactions, and to deepen his understanding of himself. Ultimately, projection and misinterpretation prevent authentic connection. When a man projects onto a woman's silence, he is no longer engaging with her as she truly is, but with a psychological image of his own making. Reclaiming that projection allows for clearer vision, deeper empathy, and a more conscious relationship, both with the woman and with the hidden aspects of himself that she unknowingly reflects. A woman's silence, when encountered by a man, can serve as a powerful and often unexpected invitation to shadow work. In Carl Jung's framework, the shadow represents the unconscious aspects of the personality that the ego refuses to recognize: traits, desires, fears, and instincts that have been repressed or denied because they don't fit with the self-image a person has constructed. While everyone possesses a shadow, it often takes a triggering experience to bring it to light. A woman's silence, mysterious and emotionally evocative, can act as just such a trigger. For a man deeply rooted in rational thought, action, and clarity, qualities typically associated with the masculine ego, a woman's silence disrupts his normal way of functioning. It presents an emotional puzzle that cannot be solved with logic or decisiveness. Faced with this unfamiliar stillness, he may feel a range of unsettling emotions: frustration, confusion, insecurity, or even anger. Rather than merely reacting to the woman's behavior, he is actually confronting parts of himself that have long been buried. This is the moment when shadow work becomes possible. The discomfort he feels is not caused by her silence alone, but by what that silence awakens within him. Perhaps it stirs memories of neglect, rejection, or emotional abandonment. Perhaps it confronts his inability to tolerate ambiguity or his need to control outcomes. Maybe it exposes an inner vulnerability he has spent years covering up with confidence or detachment. The silence acts like a mirror, showing him what he does not want to see. In Jungian terms, it opens a portal to the shadow, where everything unacknowledged waits. This confrontation with the shadow is not comfortable. In fact, Jung emphasized that shadow work is inherently challenging because it forces a person to face the truths about themselves that they've worked hard to avoid. A man might realize, for instance, that he's emotionally dependent, even if he outwardly prides himself on being self-sufficient. Or he may notice a deep-seated fear of being unworthy of love, masked by bravado or overachievement. These realizations can be humbling, even painful, but they are crucial for psychological growth. A woman's silence, therefore, becomes a kind of initiation. It strips away the external noise and demands that the man turn inward. It invites him to explore not just how he feels, but why he feels that way. This is the essence of shadow work, becoming aware of unconscious motivations, reclaiming disowned emotions, and integrating them into a more complete and balanced self. By doing so, the man doesn't just learn about his reactions, he begins to transform them. Importantly, this process isn't about blaming the woman or analyzing her motives. Her silence may have nothing to do with him personally. The key is that his reaction to her silence reveals something about his own inner world. Shadow work requires that he take full ownership of this process. It's an internal journey, not an external confrontation. As Jung observed, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. A woman's silence, in this context, becomes a gift, not because it is easy, but because it offers the rare chance to confront the hidden self. It asks the man to stop projecting, to pause the performance of the ego, and to listen to what his discomfort is trying to teach him. In embracing this invitation, a man can emerge more whole. He becomes less reactive, more emotionally intelligent, and more capable of genuine intimacy. Rather than fearing silence, he learns to respect it as a space of reflection, revelation, and real transformation. In that space, the shadow is not an enemy to be fought, but a part of the self waiting to be understood.